I would like to share a truth that has been revealed to me now. I have learned that life is truly eternal. Our real life begins only after death, when a joyful time of reunion with those we have always loved arrives. However, we must understand that our earthly life is also very important. Here we learn vital lessons to prepare for entering the vast world of the Spirit, said Douglas Conacher to his wife. Douglas and Eira Conacher married in London in 1937. They shared 20 happy years together. Douglas Conacher passed away in 1958, marking the most challenging crisis in Eira's life. She sought some confirmation that her husband's personality had not disappeared. To this end, Eira visited many mediums. Through their help, she was able to communicate with her husband again. From Douglas, Eira learned about life beyond our world. I became interested in questions about life after death, even before my husband passed away. Eira Conacher shared that she met her husband rather late in life. At the time she was 39 years old, and Douglas Conacher was nearly 20 years her senior. He was a confirmed bachelor, deeply engrossed in publishing, dedicating all his time to his work. Eira was also solely focused on her career, teaching art in a school. However, a year after their seemingly coincidental meeting, they decided to marry. Douglas Conacher was an avid reader with a particular love for history. Eira could spend hours watching him sit in his chair with a book, observing how his facial expressions changed as he read. On weekends, they would escape to the countryside to enjoy nature. Eira remarked that she never felt the age difference between them. They were simply happy to have found each other. But their happy days came to an end. Douglas underwent a complex surgery. Doctors advised him to leave the city. He had to abandon his work, and for several years he and his wife led a nomadic life. Later, Douglas underwent another major operation. Although Eira hoped for the best, she understood that her husband's days were numbered. I became interested in questions about life after death, even before my husband passed away. When Douglas was gone, I already had knowledge about the true nature of death. This helped me cope with my deep grief. I decided to continue communicating with my beloved husband through mediums. These are people who can tune into the invisible vibrations of the spirit world that also permeate our world, said Eira Conacher. Eira met Cherie North, who had such a gift. In any weather, Eira would take her tape recorder and travel to a nearby town where Cherie lived. In her presence, Eira was able to communicate with her relatives and her recently departed husband. All these conversations were recorded on tape. Eira asked her late husband questions that particularly troubled her. Among them was the question of what death is like from the perspective of someone in the spiritual world. According to Douglas Conacher, it is a transition during which a separation occurs between the true self and the physical body. While this separation brings joy to the soul, the departed also feels the same sadness experienced by those who have lost someone dear to their hearts. Watching our world, seeing the sadness and grief deeply rooted in so many minds, that is what saddens the departed the most. If only people on our side could grasp this truth, death would be perceived differently. If this grief were taken away, for the deceased, death would simply be a release from the heavy burden of weariness. I am not entirely solid for your world. I am like an unfinished house. One day, during a conversation with her husband, Eira Conacher told him that she found it difficult to imagine another world. In response, Douglas explained that, in some ways, it resembles the earthly one. It has everything we have, but on a different scale and with an entirely different kind of beauty. Douglas Conacher described his world as perfect. Now your world seems entirely different to me than how I saw it before. Since I've been here, I look more at the hearts and minds of people. I see that people in your world have changed. Essentially, they are the same, but they constantly fight and push to be first. We were like that too, but it seems to me that we did it with a certain dignity, Douglas Conacher shared. Eira asked Douglas to tell her about his transition to the other world. Douglas described it as smooth. However, when he realized what had happened, he felt some confusion. He was especially concerned about how Eira would react when she was told of his death. He didn't want her to be unhappy. He wanted Eira to know that he was all right. Upon arriving in the other world, Douglas Conacher almost immediately became aware that he was surrounded by people. Some of them he had known before, others he had not. He could see some and only sense others. The strange thing was that, although none of these people spoke to Douglas or uttered words, he could still perceive their voices. Eira Conacher asked whether the bodies of inhabitants in the spirit world were solid, or whether they could move freely through walls and other objects. Douglas assured his wife that, in his world, walls were just as real and solid to him as walls on Earth. However, when he came to Earth to communicate with Eira, earthly walls posed no barrier to him. "When I come to talk with you, I am not entirely solid for your world. I am like an unfinished house. I perceive your thoughts more than your physical essence," Douglas Conacher explained. Douglas also shared with Eira his interests in the other world. As before, he remained deeply interested in history. Additionally, he mentioned that he was very captivated by the architecture of his new world. But here, you discover that people put so much more into the creation of their homes. And because thoughts here are much more vibrant and productive, you perceive not only the building itself, but also the people who created it. You learn about them with just one look at the structure. Being deeply interested in history, Douglas Conacher, upon arriving on the other side, began seeking out the figures who had shaped history. However, these encounters mostly disappointed him. They convinced Douglas that history was written by highly biased individuals who deliberately distorted the facts. According to Douglas, the true history of humanity's life is recorded in intricate detail within the atmosphere. Yet even from his world, Douglas Conacher could not answer the question of when this history began or when it would end. You ask me what the ultimate goal of each person's journey is? If we were meant to know that, my dear, perhaps it wouldn't be entirely right. I don't think there is an end to our lives, any final point. This may be shocking for some people, but honestly, I don't believe there is an ultimate goal. I would say that everyone has something to strive for, but as soon as we reach that point, we begin to envision new horizons, new possibilities, and we move forward once again. In other words, there is no such thing as the end of life. I doubt it can exist at all, was Douglas Conacher's response to one of the most profound questions Eira asked him. Write in the comments what you think about this, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.